A runner is already gone by the time most of Athens understands what is happening. He left at dusk, alone, heading south along a road that will take him nearly 240 kilometers before he stops. His name is Phidippides, and his task is simple to describe and almost impossible to complete. Reach Sparta and convince them that Athens cannot survive what is coming without them. 3 days earlier, none of this seemed real. Athens still hoped the Persian fleet would strike somewhere else, anywhere else. Then the first survivors from Eretria began stumbling through the city gates, burned, exhausted. Some barely able to walk. An officer catches a woman before she collapses at the gate. He asks what happened. She can barely answer. Behind her, more refugees arrive carrying children, dragging carts, covered in ash, describing a city that no longer exists, walls that fell within days, temples burned first, and those who survived the fighting taken away in chains toward the ships. By the time this news spreads through the agora, panic has already taken over. Merchants abandon their stalls. Citizens argue in the streets over whose fault this is. The alliance with the Ionians, the burning of Sardis years earlier, the warnings from the Persian king that everyone chose to ignore. The fear moves faster than the facts. Then a scout rides in at full speed and nearly falls from his horse. The Persian fleet has landed. Not near some distant border, at Marathon, close enough that the road to Athens is essentially open. One man in the city already understands exactly what that means. His name is Miltiades, and, unlike almost everyone else in Athens, he has fought against Persia before. He knows how they move, how they break cities, and what happens to places that wait too long to decide. That night, 10 Athenian commanders gather for a council, and the room splits almost immediately. Half want to stay behind the walls and force the Persians into a siege. Half know that Athens was never built to survive one. Miltiades makes the case that waiting hands the enemy everything: the countryside, the roads, and the initiative, and that Marathon is the only place left where they can be stopped before reaching the city. The vote ends up split evenly, 5 against 5, which means the outcome now rests entirely on one man, Callimachus, the polemarch of Athens, holding the deciding vote. Miltiades tells him plainly that if they hesitate now, fear will tear the city apart before the Persians ever arrive. Callimachus says nothing for a long moment. Then he gives his answer. They march. At dawn, roughly 10,000 Athenians leave the city. Hours into the march, allies appear on the road. 1,000 soldiers from the small city of Plataea, sent not because anyone expects a Greek victory, but because standing with Athens now is the only way to avoid facing Persia completely alone later. When the combined force finally reaches the high ground, overlooking the plain of Marathon, the scale of what they are facing becomes impossible to ignore. Ships line the shore. Rows of tents stretch along the beach. Scouts return with numbers that silence the camp, tens of thousands of infantry, alongside a large and mobile cavalry force. For a moment, some in the ranks are certain this is a fight they cannot win. Miltiades makes a decision that will define the entire battle before a single spear is thrown. He sends Phidippides south, towards Sparta, to ask for help neither side is sure will arrive in time. What follows is not a battle, it's a wait. For days, the two armies simply watch each other. The Athenians hold a position near the hills, protected on one flank by high ground and on the other by rough terrain, controlling the only road that leads back to their city. The Persians, confident and unhurried, see no reason to rush. To them, this is a militia of farmers that will fall whenever it's convenient to make it fall. Then the runner finally returns from Sparta, and the news is not what anyone hoped for. Sparta cannot march yet. A religious festival, the Carneia, forbids the army from leaving until it ends. Athens will stand alone for several more days, and every one of those days gives the Persians another option: attack outright, sail directly for the undefended city, or simply let exhaustion and fear do the work for them. It's during this waiting period that something on the Persian side changes, and historians still argue over exactly what it means. Athenian soldiers notice unusual movement near the shoreline, horses being led toward the ships, crews shouting across the surf, vessels repositioning. By the time a scout confirms it, the Persian cavalry camps appear empty. Nobody in the Greek camp knows for certain why. Maybe the cavalry is being reloaded onto ships for a separate strike. Maybe part of the army is preparing to sail for Athens directly while the rest holds the plain. But from where Miltiades stands, one thing is clear. Whatever this movement means, the battlefield in front of him looks different than it did an hour ago. Fewer horses, less coordination, and possibly the only opening he will ever get. He calls the commanders together and gives an order most of them think is reckless. Attack now, downhill, across open ground, directly into Persian archers, without Spartan support. The argument that wins the room is brutally simple. If the cavalry returns, this chance disappears. If the Persian fleet reaches Athens first, none of this will have mattered anyway. There is no safe option left, only a costly one, and Miltiades chooses it anyway. He makes one final adjustment to the Greek line before it moves, strengthening both flanks and thinning the center, not because it's the strongest configuration, but because the line needs to stretch wide enough to avoid being surrounded. It's a calculated risk that could unravel the entire formation if the center breaks too early. The Greeks begin advancing slowly, shields locked, and then accelerate into a full charge, an entire hoplite line running straight into Persian missile range, something the Persians reportedly assume is a sign the Athenians have lost their minds. The two forces meet with tremendous force. Along the center, where Persia's strongest troops are stationed, the Greek line begins buckling almost immediately, driven backward uphill under pressure that looks, for several terrifying minutes, like it will end the battle before it truly begins. But the center was never where this battle would be decided. On both flanks, the heavier Greek hoplites overwhelm the lighter Persian infantry, and instead of chasing the retreat, they turn inward, closing in on the exposed Persian center from both sides at once. What looked like a Persian breakthrough collapses into confusion, then panic, then a full retreat toward the ships. Some flee into the marshes and disappear into the mud. Others fight in the surf itself, trying to launch vessels before the Greek line reaches the shore. By the time it's over, the Athenians have done something almost nobody in Greece believed was possible. They've stopped a Persian invasion force in open battle. But Miltiades doesn't get a moment to process it. A scout points toward the horizon. The surviving Persian fleet is turning, not home, but toward Athens itself. The exhausted army reforms immediately and marches back the way it came, because everything accomplished at Marathon means nothing if the city falls undefended while its soldiers are still on the road. They arrive just in time. When the Persian ships reach the coast near Athens, they find the city armed, organized, and waiting. The fleet turns away. For the first time, a Persian invasion force has been defeated in open battle by a Greek army, and the psychological impact spreads far beyond Athens. Persia is no longer seen as unstoppable. Even Sparta, arriving after the fighting has ended, walks the battlefield studying what happened here. But this isn't the end of the story. In Persia, King Darius begins planning a far larger invasion almost immediately, one he won't live to launch. That task falls to his son, Xerxes, who returns a decade later with one of the largest armies the ancient world has ever assembled. And the next time Greece faces that army, it won't be on an open plain where flanks can turn and lines can bend. It will be inside a narrow mountain pass most people know today by a single name, Thermopylae.